Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishkondareya, where we're hosting one of the retail academies. And tonight's conversation is about brand collaborations and whether they really are a platform for growth. So I'm hoping by the end of this, we answer that question. I can hear that we're just getting the sound right, but can everybody hear this? It's a lovely room, and it's very nice that we've all had a glass of champagne. So I've got a wonderful panel this evening who've got three different perspectives on everything that we talk about. Here is my lawyer, and Lewis is basically protecting everything we're talking about and giving us that legal filter that we all need when we're going into these kind of relationships. Fiona's very kindly agreed to join us with a retailer perspective. And Dan is giving us the brand's perspective. Now I'm going to let all of my speakers introduce themselves. But before we kick off, just a couple of things. I want to tell you some of the things that we want to cover tonight. And I do want to encourage you to ask questions. We're going to have a nice long 15 minutes at the end. Hopefully you do have some questions. And because we've got such a vibrant panel, and this is a little bit of a Chatham House rules environment, that we can ask questions that we really want to have answered as well. 1 second on my background. My name is Angela Ferrugia, and I'm actually currently a lecturer at Central St Martin's on the MA Fashion team. I also lecture at University of Westminster on the MA Fashion Business. So I have worked around IP for many, many years, worked with Daniel, we've worked out for over 30 years. So obviously we don't look that old. And really represented brands of all shapes and sizes, and can't help myself but love a collaboration and love putting it together. So I'm hoping I can really help the best out of all of our speakers tonight. We are going to cover a range of topics, but we're going to go through, everyone's got a view on this subject as well. And if I could just ask the audience, who is aware of collaborations in the marketplace when they break? Who's seen them and aware of them? Yeah, that's virtually the entire audience. Who has bought a collaboration product in the last year? Okay. Much smaller reference of numbers in terms of people who are actually engaging in that process. So obviously the subject matter today kind of brings us back to commercial viability and why you would do this, because that's one of the key questions that we'd love to answer for everybody as well, is why go into this? So let me introduce the panel. Lewis, who is with me as well. Lewis, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi everyone, good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lewis Cohen. I'm a partner and head of the commercial team here at Mishkondareya. I also co-head our retail practice and our hotels and hospitality practice. I've been working in collaborations and kind of in the broader sense for over 20 years. I think my first, really a sponsorship agreement, but it's kind of a collaboration as well. We can talk about that if we have to. But was working with Tesco on their sponsorship of the Millennium Dome, which, and ever since then I've done in the sponsorship field things like sponsoring of World Cups, football teams, Formula One, image rights agreements, and brand collaborations, really from every stage of the life cycle of a business. So I work with early stage businesses on perhaps their first and early stage collaborations, all the way to the likes of the Caring Group and their major international collaborations. I've worked with a brand called Castor, who you may be reading about quite a lot in the press. So I advised them on their initial collaboration with Andy Murray, which really helped propel them into a new direction, and then their subsequent deals with Newcastle and Rangers. I've worked with L'Oreal on their collaborations with David Beckham and a host of other ones. So that's just a little bit about me.
Fiona.
So my background is I started in design at Next, but worked very closely with George Davis, who then went on to found Georgia Asda, and subsequently went back to Next for a long time as their women's wear director. Went back to George as their brand director as well, but then have done years at Dunelm looking after their product offer, was involved in starting a brand at River Island, and most recently was the managing director of Jaeger at M&S. I'm probably here actually because I've done lots of collaborations from, actually when I started at George they were using Colleen McLaughlin, so before she was Colleen Rooney, very early doors, and most recently obviously have seen M&S with their collaboration with the England football team and everything in between actually. So hopefully quite a broad experience, and see the huge positive benefits of collaborations in the retail sector.
Thanks, Fiona. Dan?
Hi, I'm Daniel Avner. I'm the founder and CEO of MDR Brand Management. As Angela kindly reminded me, I've been working with intellectual property of all shapes and sizes for over 30 years, but most recently set up MDR Brand Management as one of the consultancy businesses here at Mishcon de Reya. We're the world's first brand management business to be part of an international law firm, and we work with big global brands such as Hershey's, Revlon, FIFA, and projects with Amy Winehouse and a host of entertainment properties. And we work on brand extension around the world. We operate in 25 markets, so we have our eyes and ears on different cultures, the appreciation of collaborations in many of those markets. And yeah, very pleased to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Well, Dan, as you're speaking, I want to dive right in. And even though Fiona's given us a little sneak answer to this one, but I just wanted to ask, are collaborations dead? You know, I regularly pick up trade press that says, you know, they're overused, or they're not hitting the mark, or whatever it may be. But are they dead? And if so, where are they buried?
Are you hitting my controversial button?
Absolutely.
I mean, my sentiment very much is collaborations are dead, but long live the collaboration.
Yeah.
I think every brand, consumer brand, has a marketing tick box that they must do a collaboration. And that's ticked and done, and let's move on to the next thing. And I think that was fine, and it continued for a number of years. And then, I don't know if everyone remembers the pandemic, because a lot of people seem to have forgotten about that. But during the pandemic, I think there was a huge shift in the way that consumers interacted with brands. There were D2C models that were evolving, superior customer service, access to different sorts of collaborations and purchasing opportunities. And I think the mindset has really shifted from the consumer. And they can see through the bullshit. And I think, you know, there are a number of examples, which I'm not going to name and shame today, but there are a number of examples where, from my perspective, there's really lazy thinking, there's lazy creative execution, and some brands just do it because they think it's the right thing to do. On the other hand, there have been some fantastic collaborations, and there continue to be so. So I think my overall sentiment is, you know, you've really got to understand what you're trying to achieve, who you're trying to target, and what your key objective is if you decide to collaborate with an influencer, a celebrity, or another brand.
Fiona, do you want to chime in on this point?
Yeah, I mean,
are they alive and well for the retailer?
Exactly. I think the reality is retail now, the consumer, that's the death knell. The death knell of the collaboration there. I think the retailer and the consumer, is constantly looking for newness, and they've got a lower and lower boredom threshold, and they are bombarded with noise. And I think as a retailer, you are, you know, constantly striving for what is going to create the right noise for your brand, what is going to drive traffic to your website, what is going to drive footfall to your stores, what is going to get your brand talked about in a very, very noisy environment. And I think collaborations is just one of the ways you can do that. You know, it is creating news, it is creating content.
Yeah.
And, you know, it can add a lot of value to a brand, whether you're a big brand and you want to bring in new customers, or a smaller brand and you want access to a broader customer base. You know, I think you can add value, whatever you are doing as a retailer, by getting the right collaboration. So it's not dead.
So just finishing up on that point as well, Dan, you mentioned the tick box scenario of some companies thinking, okay, we've got a gap to fill. Would you say that the partnership element, the collaboration, the partnership element is strategic for business, or is it tactical? Because I have something I need to achieve and I need a collaboration to go make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of collaborations, unless you are looking for a long-term collaboration, is tactical.
Okay.
But if it's done in the right way, it's strategic as well. So it depends on, again, what you're trying to achieve and with who and for which channel. If you look at Coca-Cola, for example, they've had a very long-standing relationship with Dolce & Gabbana, 4, maybe 6 seasons. But that's a collaboration that's lasted, more than most.
Yeah.
So I think there is a tactical element depending on the lifespan, but it needs to be strategic. And again, back to my earlier point, some of the executions that we have seen don't seem to be that strategic, and the execution is questionable.
Lewis, do you want to add anything before we move on?
Yeah, obviously, I think the challenges that you mentioned are right. And of course, we still see collaborations that are tick boxes. But I think because of those challenges, the really sophisticated operators are thinking more deeply. Certainly, some of the agreements and arrangements that we're asked to advise on are much more complicated, have greater longevity and sophistication, and require, first of all, much deeper collaboration between the parties, opening up their archives, meeting of their creative teams, which is quite energizing and quite different to perhaps what went before, which is, we'll just take your brand and we'll put it on our product. And you only have to look at whether you think it's a good collaboration or not, but Gucci and Adidas, where they've actually developed and opened pop-up stores all around the world, and that is a really deep, meaningful collaboration, which probably was not necessarily imaginable not that long ago. So I think I don't disagree with you, but I definitely think there are reactions to that. There are still the people tick boxing, and that probably leads to failure. But there are those who can see the opportunity to perhaps strike a more interesting collaboration.
And do we think like a Nike Tiffany scenario was just a tick box? Sorry if anyone's representing
It was
either of
a
those
shoe
parties.
box. It was a shoe box, not a tick box. I think that's an interesting example. And again, I didn't want to name and shame, but I think, again...
I'm allowed to.
Since you brought it up, I think the execution there was baffling. And I think actually, and I was speaking to a member of the audience this evening, and we both agree that if that execution had been the other way around and Nike had actually created a shoe with a Tiffany blue colour as opposed to putting a black Nike trainer in a Tiffany box, then perhaps there would have been a bit more resonance to that execution. So going back to Lewis's point, I think there is absolutely amazing examples of collaborations. I'm not saying they're dead, I'm just saying that I think there just needs, for it to work and for it to have resonance with the consumer, especially if you're driving a new audience, then it needs to stand up for itself and it needs to make sense.
So in this day and age, when we talk to brands and we advise brands, all of us in different capacities, we always beat on about true brand authenticity, and protecting that at all costs. So does the partnership or the collaboration blur those lines, or is it something that can add value to either party? I don't know, Fiona, if you want to kick off on that.
Yeah, funny enough, I think it's the reverse, because I've got a retail perspective. Obviously, the brands I've worked for have a brand DNA, and I think it's quite interesting when you've got smaller brands, it's very easy to maintain your brand identity and your brand DNA. But every brand is looking for growth. So, if you're a menswear brand, you can maybe go into different sectors of menswear, or you could, go into footwear, or you can go into men's jewellery, and then you can maybe go international. But if you're still looking for growth, it's very easy to leak out of your brand identity whether it's trying to gain a different customer. And similarly, bigger brands, it's probably a similar thing. If you're a very broad church, it's how do you continue to grow a customer base without losing your brand identity? So I think the interesting thing about collaborations is it allows you to create a hybrid for a short period of time, actually, which is one of the reasons why I think it actually works for short periods, actually, rather than long periods, where you can happily come up, as I said, with a hybrid that means neither of you lose your brand identity, and you come up with something hopefully joyful in the middle.
So it's reliant on both brands having a strong DNA.
And what's great is that you can hopefully celebrate the best of it, use the greatest ideas, but without breaking your brand DNA. You're actually mixing the DNA stream. Who knew you were going to get a bit of a biology lesson there? But that's how I see it. That's how collaborations work. So it allows you to stretch your brand, but without breaking your brand identity.
In an authentic way so 2 and 2 equals 5.
Correct.
Yeah.
You create a third thing
and
in the partnership.
It shouldn't be forced. I think, that's kind of where you're forcing a brand onto another one. It doesn't make sense. One of the brilliant examples that I thought of was Manolo Blahnik collaborating with Birkenstock, where you've got two absolute stellar footwear brands that decided to come together and celebrate their expertise in footwear. And to me, that makes perfect sense because there's a symbiotic link between the two brands that the consumer will absolutely resonate with and would be inspired to buy that product.
Yeah.
And I think when you force a brand onto another one or vice versa, and there isn't that seamless link, then the hard work starts.
I think it's such a good example as well because it's representative of no boundaries. This is two companies that 10 years ago would have said, we're both in the footwear market. We're protecting our piece, our slice of that footwear market. And yet they decided that 2 and 2 equaling 5 was the way forward. So it's really quite extraordinary within category.
Yes.
Taking something like that and making it work. Lewis, do you want to add anything?
I guess what I'd say on that is really to kind of resonate that just before you start, because sometimes we have clients come to us and they've been presented with a deal, but they haven't done the thinking beforehand. They don't know, really, they're not even certain of what they really stand for sometimes, but they also haven't done the due diligence on their partner and thought enough about what do they stand for, what are their ethics, what are their values, what actually is this going to deliver for us? And it is really just a plonking their brand onto someone else's product, and they're surprised when it doesn't deliver the returns. I mean, I'll ask them, well, actually what you're trying to achieve, and it's fine if it's just a revenue piece, if that works. And it might be that they want to try their brand in a different product range or a different territory. So there are sometimes benefits, but it's surprising actually how often just that very first basic question, the answer is, oh, well, we just need to do some marketing and we just need to get our brand out there. And actually the counter to that is there's a growing luxury bone, china and crystal ware brand called Richard Brendan. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's been very, he really loves collaborations, but he's been very, very strategic. So he thinks, how do I find new customers? Where are they going to be? And who's going to buy my product? And so he's done collaborations with the V&A, with the Corinthia. So all places where actually it's going to be people who might not have seen his exquisite products, but A, would be interested in them, and B, might want to buy them, and they can buy them from those products. So he's really just using it, to Fiona's point, to gain a new audience. But that's not always the case, and still to this day.
I think you collectively have all hit, the button on saying, if your heart isn't in it, first of all, if you're doing it solely for money, it's got danger written all over it anyway. The whole thing has to come together as an emotional experience. And that kind of leads us on to talking about, the kind of danger areas when you're in a collaboration. The creative handcuffs come off. So whether that's allowing someone to play with your core brand, whether it's some kind of, real piece of DNA that you might have as a business, but allowing a third party to look at it through their filter, really what this is about as well. So the creative handcuffs, and it feels like fashion has led the way on this. And maybe fashion is just the beacon for experimentation, and it comes down into other areas. But again, I don't know who wants to kick off, Dan or Fiona, on this one, because I'm sure you've both got a viewpoint. But Dan, do you want to give us a view on?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think fashion and accessories and sort of lifestyle have led the way. I would say that there's been some really great proof points in food and beverage. So some of the things that come to mind, Ben & Jerry's have just done a collaboration with Tony Chocolonely. We, with our client Hershey's, have done a global collaboration with Kellogg's. Today was announced that Disney have done a massive collaboration with Coca-Cola. So I think it's not necessarily, I think it stretches.
Yeah.
And it's the ingredient inside. That could be a taste ingredient, or it could be a technical aspect, an intel inside.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity to collaborate is on multi-levels.
Yeah. Fiona, what's your take on this?
100%. I think it's a really interesting direction to go. I mean, we were just talking beforehand, Ed Sheeran releasing tomato ketchup recently,
Hello.
So I think that's a great idea.
He doesn't need the money either.
No. I was actually, having recently left Jaeger, I was desperate to do a Jaguar and Jaeger. I mean, just imagine the logo, how good that would have been. So I just think, and again, you could, there was an authenticity about that was about the British brand and the heritage that would have sat fabulously together. So I think for, creative people to think outside the box of going, how do you take, this DNA, fashion DNA, but also you can tie it in with something completely else, whether it is flavours, whether it's automotive, whether it's airlines. Actually, I've been doing some work with Prince's Trust, and they're collaborating with Disney as well. And I just think, again, you've got something that's a charity saying, how can we leverage a collaboration? So, I think that, once the creative gates are opened, there's lots and lots of potential.
I think actually even just the passion in your answer of just imagine what the Jaeger logo looked like next to the Jaguar logo.
Brilliant.
That's
I reflect.
We need to embody that though in collaborations. If you don't get that joy of them coming together, the customer's going to feel slightly like it's another thing.
Yeah. No, it has got to be authentic.
You've got to have that energy.
It's got to be
founder energy. And if founder doesn't get it, then it's somebody who's passionate about the brand.
Yeah, and I
that's
think,
when the magic happens.
And then also sort of post-pandemic thought process. Okay, so let's say you've got the magic. The magic's happened. You've got two design teams that are coming together and have created something that they universally agree on. But the consumer's still going to ask, okay, so what's it really doing for me? Is there a sustainability aspect to it? What's the social impact of what we're doing? Where's it being manufactured? Is it helping the community? Is there money back going to the planet or the oceans or whatever? And I think these are the thought processes that resonate with consumers as an after glow, or not glow, but an after effect of pandemic where everyone thought they were going to...
Yeah, that is a watch out actually, because I was just thinking about the Prince's Trust and the Disney piece as well though, because again it could be another form of greenwashing if it isn't done with real heart and real thinking through. Any collaboration that isn't really ticking the right boxes and doing all of the due diligence, but also really it isn't the equivalent of greenwashing.
And then Lewis,
is it collaboration washing? Is that what we're going to call it now?
Well, we can do.
We'll start there.
Christened here, yes, exactly.
But then Lewis, I think you, when we were talking, you had an interesting point about who's manufacturing this thing. Who agrees to let go of the reins to allow another factory? Is it a joint factory? Is it audited?
Yeah.
All of those sorts of things come into play to make sure that the consumer's not being greenwashed or collab-washed.
I don't want to think of a better name, but something along those
something that might not actually stand up to the test of
because I think
standards.
The reality is that in practice, a collaboration appears in front of us and it looks quite simple at how it got there. But you're right, it does have to go through all these iterations even though the parties are billed as equal, someone took the lead on manufacturing, on, creativity. I'm sure, both parties signed off and so on and so forth, but someone took the lead on creating the product. So therefore you're giving away your chime in at any point on this, because that must be risk right there.
So, well, I mean, if you want me to talk about the risks, we could be here all night. Do you want me to talk about a few?
I was asking you earlier, as a retailer,
I think you should.
I think it's good to know. It's good to know. We were saying Gap and Yeezy earlier. It's like kind of as a retailer, what could go wrong?
Well, look, the reality is, with every specific collaboration, there's always going to be different risks, and you have to analyse each potential collaboration for itself, because no two collaborations are the same. It's not a cookie cutter approach, and we never apply that. But there are certain things, and we've touched on them already tonight, that do kind of always run through these. And we've touched on some. Like the first one, obviously, is intellectual property rights and trademarks. And the first thing you're going to be asked to do, pretty much any time you say to someone, "Oh, let's do a collaboration. Hey, do you want to use my brand?" is you're going to be asked to stand behind your brand, and so give some kind of contractual assurances. And of course, you may be happy to do that, but actually, have you stopped to think, have I registered my trademark in the countries that the person I'm collaborating with operates? Have I registered it for these collaboration goods, because they're not my normal goods quite often? And that's an immediate risk. And the risk is also if someone else has registered it, because actually, yes, obviously we've been talking about Coca-Cola's and other, but actually lots of brands, they may have protection. Trademarks are protected in different jurisdictions. So you might have protected your mark in the UK. Someone else could be using it in the Middle East or Asia or wherever. And if you're doing a deal with a multinational and you're not yet a multinational, you may not have had a watching service.
That's also unforeseen cost.
Well, and massive risk. I mean, you could be basically, if you've given a warranty and indemnity, you could be affected, and you've gone down that whole path, all that manufacturing, they go and sell and boom, they're sued.
Yeah.
And you've given indemnity. If you haven't got insurance, which is unlikely, and you haven't done basic searches, you're going to be in trouble. So before you embark on this, do you have the trademark protection? If not, at least do some clearance searches to check that your trademark can be used in the jurisdictions in which your partner is going to be selling the stock, because they're likely different, and in those goods. Also, I mean, we see, and our brands team see it all the time, we've all heard of these big brands that get locked out of markets. It happens all the time. I mean, it happens to big brands, but it happens all the time. So you need to remember, hang on, have I ever signed a coexistence agreement with someone? Have I ever had a problem with someone where I've said, actually, I won't use the trademark there, or I won't use it for those goods and services? People often really forget, particularly the goods and services, because sometimes you're boxed in, because you're like, oh, don't worry, I'm only going to use it for clothing and footwear. I'm never going to do makeup. And of course, you then do a makeup collaboration, and no one's done the diligence. There are different people in the team, and boom. Yeah. So you've got another issue there. We've talked some of these things. Is often in collaboration, you won't actually use your trademark. You might use an embellishment of your trademark, which could be really cool, because you could kind of get some new protection. But of course, trademarks are all about distinctiveness and protecting that distinctiveness. So you could lose your distinctiveness and potentially leave someone to challenge your trademark because you've embellished your own trademark. The flip side of that, of course, and you kind of talked about Tiffany, what they could, with their blue colour, which they obviously wanted to protect blue, if they really used blue in a big way, then that could have really shown that on its own, without the Tiffany brand, blue is big. You look at Adidas, they have spent, and obviously they had that famous dispute with Tom Brown, whatever, but they have spent years trying to protect their 3 stripes. In their collaboration with Gucci, they used 3 stripes on its own with the Gucci trademark. And again, that proves that they're 3 stripes of distinctive of Adidas. So these things actually can help to build your brand and reinforce things that you may have struggled for, and really give you evidence that actually your brand is distinctive, or that particular part of its brand. And the other thing on the trademark, I'm going to move on to other things, but is obviously you create lots of new IP with these collaborations. Yeah. And the biggest headache we often have is who owns the new IP, and
the third thing.
Well, look, Fendacci, you could create something massively valuable, right? Hugely valuable. And if you haven't sorted out beforehand, how are you going to? Can I use it? Can you use it? Yeah. What about the other IP that you might create new designs, new products? So, these are all issues that you really need someone to be thinking about before you go into these.
And while you're talking,
yep.
Can I just ask you a quick question about data?
Data?
Because I'm going to come back to the marketing question, guys, but Lewis is on a roll now. And I want to make sure that we get this covered. But when two parties come together, majority of the time they create some excitement. And they all want to own that customer.
Yeah.
I know that you're not a data specialist because you carefully told me that before, but I think it's a really good question for the audience as well about, GDPR rules and who owns that.
Okay.
Is it down to each digital party kind of like where it filters? I don't know. I don't know the answer.
No. Okay.
Surprisingly.
So thank you. I'm not a data lawyer, but I think let's deal with data and store differently. I think if it's digital and in store. If it's digital, it's actually first of all, it all starts with a contract because you want to pre-agree this before you start. Am I going to own the data? Because sometimes there's a lead in a collaboration.
But sometimes that's why guys go into a partnership is to get that audience.
So if it's digital, and so say you went to M&S and you bought a collaboration product, well, you're actually only on the M&S website.
Yeah.
You're buying the product from M&S, and so actually your contracts with M&S, you've probably signed up to their privacy notice. They may, and so they can probably use your data, obviously, to fulfill the contract. And in the digital world, there's something called like a soft opt-in, so they'd be presumably allowed to carry on marketing to use similar types of products. So if you're the person who's collaborated with M&S, you're not getting the data.
No.
So you'd actually need to, in the contract, say, listen, M&S, for this deal, I want you to share the data. So how are we going to work this out? So then you'd probably need to direct the customers, to a different privacy notice and tell them quite clearly, actually, if you're buying this product, here's the privacy notice. We're going to share your data with collaborating party, and are you happy for them to market to you? And it's really easy on a website. It's a tick box. Boom, you've sorted it out. In a store, it's an absolute nightmare. And you see brands trying to do it. You walk into the store, right? And they go, and for a start, how do they get your consent to marketing and get your data? Signing up on some kind of screen, or someone takes you through it. Yeah. But then they've got to kind of say, they could kind of say, are you okay for us to market to you? And then make a note themselves on the screen. But that doesn't deal with the collaboration partner. They'd actually have to somehow either give you some kind of code or take you through a process. So in store, it's really never really going to happen. Okay. I think the best place to do it is online sales.
And through each channel.
And because you have to give that privacy notice, that you have to tell people that you're going to be using their data and for what purposes.
So at this stage, marketing, some brands come into this business model to really change lanes, to come out of where they're known and they're perceived, but to actually create some kind of different communication strategy with their customers. I was telling Fiona very briefly, I took my 16-year-old son to go and buy his first tuxedo. I took him to the ground floor of M&S and he was like, Mum, really? Really? But by the time I got him up to the third floor, he said to me, it's okay, Mum, they kit out the England team. I hadn't even seen it. He'd seen it. I hadn't seen it, but it suddenly made it acceptable for a 16-year-old boy to go in M&S and buy his tuxedo, which we did 250 quid later. So we're going to talk about changing lanes now and brands that sort of go cross lanes. And I think the really good example is Louis Vuitton's Supreme, because I think that was the one where we were like, that's good. That's really good. Louis Vuitton wanted to get into that luxury street marketplace. And Supreme, small as they were in the skate industry, loved being seen as a premium luxury brand. What are the implications of changing lanes for brands? How does that play out? I mean, there's obviously risk attached with this. You're talking about high-low or street premium or whatever it might be, but you are actually stretching things quite extraordinary. So maybe, Fiona, you want to kick off?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think it depends where the brand is on its journey itself. A great example currently is Clarks, actually.
Yeah, actually, it's a good example.
They, a brand that was seen as old-fashioned. You go there for your kids' shoes because they do the width fittings and that's about it, kind of thing. And I mean, interesting, I had a chat with their marketing team, but and they've done so many regular collaborations recently. So whether it is Zara, which has suddenly made their kids' shoes seem much more fashionable. They've just done Moncler.
Yeah.
They did Black Panther. So I think that, they're on. They've definitely harnessed the use of collaborations to change the perception.
Yeah.
Get new customers looking at it. Get other customers. Traffic going there, whether it is, clearly Zara's got a whole customer base that if they're suddenly looking at Clarks. So, I think that's a great example of, harnessing a collaboration to
But it's also
really
then
change
speaks to our topic, which is it's a growth driver.
It's a growth driver. I mentioned Gap and Yeezy. That's an example that's gone categorically wrong, where they've tried to harness something to change their perception.
Yeah.
And I think, that is somewhere where you've got to, definitely walk into collaborations with an open eye and go.
Particularly where influencers.
Yes. Well, I remember literally years ago talking about it at George, and my marketing director saying to me, that person, if they stumble out of a club, drunk and fall over in front of the paparazzi, and it's a family brand. How does that reflect on the George brand, which is a family brand? So. I think every collaboration you look into, you've almost got to think what's the worst that could happen.
Yeah.
Not just look at the best that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But and that's clearly, I suppose, whether it's the legal side of it or the marketing side of it, what the damage it can do.
Yeah.
But I think Clarks is a very good example of how
It's
they
a brilliant
harnessed
example. Dan, do you want to add into
I
this
think
one?
Clarks is a great example because I think they are known for quality and they're known for craftsmanship, and you're not going to get that from other shoe brands. So I think that fit because it is so trusted from a family's perspective, and the brand's been around for 100 whatever years.
I know. I don't worry about the Clarks thing. I do worry about Moncler deciding to go with Clarks.
But I think
because that's the you've got two brands in here. You can celebrate it from a Clarks perspective, and then you can say, did that really help Moncler?
I think
Obviously it did, because they decided to do it.
But I think that the choice, because of quality and the craftsmanship, made it
easier.
An easier
Yeah.
decision.
And it's also kids.
Yes,
Is it kids?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the same way that we said it allows you to harness a bit of their DNA for a short term.
Yeah.
For Moncler, it probably allowed them to do some lower price points for a short
I
period of
think
time.
it's an absolute win for Clarks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree, and a smart bit of negotiation by their marketing team. But it's borrowed DNA, isn't it? It's not something that's going to be damaging to Moncler in the long term, because it's a short partnership. It's a short win. I mean, obviously H&M have got a huge history,
Exactly.
and it's starting with Karl Lagerfeld and more,
Over 20 years.
and this summer's Mugler. So anything from Comme des Garçons to Stella McCartney in between. So and I think what's interesting for them is the limited edition aspect of it. So I think the designers, for them it's great because it creates this really short-term. It's tiny quantities, so everybody's talking about it. So it's a big plus for H&M because they've got these fantastic collaborations, people queuing around the block to buy it. But it still keeps that exclusive feeling of the designers because they only buy the smallest amount of it, and everybody is talking about it. So I think that's clearly a collaboration strategy.
That has been doing that for 20 odd years.
20 years.
Yeah, that has worked.
And do you
for
remember
them.
when they did the David Beckham one and we were like, wow,
Yeah.
that was amazing.
But it's very clever on
actually
both
seeing
sides.
it come to life
And
made
because-
you think,
Yeah.
okay, this is how it can be done.
But they've built that credibility and that platform that brands feel very comfortable
Yeah.
partnering with them. So it is changing lanes, but it's done with efficacy and trust and a proof of concept for 20 years.
And huge marketing budgets.
Sure.
That
and
actually
it's a global brand.
make the whole thing look very gorgeous up front anyway.
Yeah,
So
it's a global
if you haven't engaged, these are marketing-led product initiatives.
But the scale of it will also deliver
Yes.
the revenue.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with, I mean, I don't know what the store count is currently, but
Yeah.
you know, you are
Many
dealing
thousands.
with,
Because they go global.
so
But
it
the
ticks all those boxes.
I remember
the
buying
PR
tickets for the Marnie one,
Yeah.
standing in line to go to H&M. You know, I remember
But the
doing
PR
that.
goes on and on. You know, the
Yeah.
fact that it's been sold on eBay for 3 times the
The
face
price,
value,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it
true.
is a PR and marketing dream.
Yeah. Lewis?
I mean, I just look at it more from the perspective of, you know, the things you need to tick beforehand. You know, because if you're changing lane and actually you're letting someone else's manufacturing products under your brand, you know, you might have codes of conduct, you might have sustainability criteria, you might have ethical and worker conditions that are applicable to your entire supply chain. What do you know about your collaborations partners and what they're doing?
It's very true.
And particularly actually with some of these more global fast fashion businesses who are increasingly under the spotlight. So
Yeah.
I think particularly, you know, as we've seen businesses that are, you know, purposeful by design and sustainability at the heart, I think businesses need to do their diligence much more before they start a collaboration, because it could come and hit them on day one. It could undermine, going back to that brand authority and that authenticity very, very easily. You also don't have a contract with the manufacturers. You don't see who they are, where they're manufacturing. You know, what happens if something goes wrong? Are you disclosing your confidential information to them? So again, there's that diligence point and that loss of control that you have to, I think you have to accept, but I think it's becoming increasingly difficult now. I think it will become harder actually for some brands to collaborate as we move to, as these positions become much more entrenched and people are reporting on them, because actually as soon as it's hard enough for businesses to have a clue what's going on in their own supply chain. How do you collaborate with someone else who's a global business?
Yeah.
You know, unless they've got a full suite of everything and telling you everything, which at the moment I don't think exists. So I think the ethical considerations are there, and also there are just practical considerations sometimes, because you're trying to do a deal and you're changing lanes, but actually the party, if you're global, that party might already have exclusive distribution, they might have franchisees, they might have licensees, and can you feed into their supply chain can you do cross supply? So there's a lot of practical challenges which make the timescales for actually getting these deals done quite challenging, and you often, there's the creatives who are driving it, and everyone else in the business, on the operation side, on the legal side, is pedaling as fast as they can, and often they don't have, particularly the bigger the business, the more challenging this is to actually, you're still drafting the contracts and the product's on sale. I'm not joking, right? It happens. Or you're drafting a force majeure clause to try to protect yourself because they're trying to rely on a force majeure in China, and you're like, well, you could see it coming. Why didn't you move? You've got factories there, and there. So, I think there are a myriad of obviously these are very exciting collaborations. I hate to be the downer on this, but actually the importance of pausing, thinking about what's important to you, as we've discussed, and actually thinking how that plays out with your partner, not just what's important for you, but how do they meet that? And it's not always done, actually. And I'm surprised there's not more of a light shined upon that. So even with some of the collaborations you talked about, with people who stand for certain things and then do a collaboration with a business that doesn't quite share these same values. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Well, we are rapidly running out of time. I'd love to wind up today by a little bit of a what's next from each of you. I think there's several subjects we haven't touched on, but I do want to leave 10 minutes for questions as well. Where do we think the future of partnerships is going? Is it more frequent? Is it more authenticity? Do you think there'll be a kickback? What's going to happen? Crystal ball moment.
100% it's going to continue, and 100% there's going to be some real standout winners that will be huge success stories for consumers, will win awards, will be talked about for years and years to come, and then there'll be the standard marketing tick box stuff that people will just forget overnight, the brands that are very promiscuous in terms of the number of collaborations they do a year, which can be up to 20 or 30.
Yeah.
And consumers just lose sight of that. So I would say focus on really making sure you have a very clear strategy, what you're trying to achieve, how you're going to do it, how you're going to land it, and what really is it doing to your consumer, and is there really value that you're bringing to that purchase? Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, for sure. I mean, they're exciting.
Thank you, Dan.
I think I'll probably reiterate what I said at the beginning, that I think the reality is, because of the amount of information a consumer is given, whether it's through social media, marketing, there's a lot of noise. And I think, people will always be looking for how do they create something that is newsworthy, PR worthy, and the reality is collaborations do buy you two audiences.
Yeah.
So I think they will continue. I think people will have to think, is it authentic? Yeah. Because I think the amount of transparency people are looking for, you can't collab wash or whatever term we're going to come up with. So it's got to be completely authentic. But I just think it's the best creative brains coming together to give a customer something new.
Yeah.
And I think people will think out of the box, whether it is, as I mentioned, whether it is, I think Ed Sheeran tomato ketchup was a great example of, something that's just not natural, and maybe it's not authentic. But Jaguar and Jaeger, I think, was a great example, even though it never happened, because there was a real authenticity that was across different streams. I think collaborations will happen across different things like space as well. Mm-hmm. I think sharing space with like-minded brands. I just think there's a whole host of ways that collaborations will go forward, and it'll be. It's got to be authentic, though. It's got to be authentic.
Yeah.
I think just to add to Fiona's point about noise, and obviously that is important because people need to find out about it. But actually speaking to the audience is easier said than done. Certainly when you're looking at social, and there's not just one consumer base, there are hundreds of micro tribes within the ecosystem of the consumer base. And these consumers aren't just brand loyal to one brand, they will switch in a heartbeat. So actually it's how you communicate to the right audience with the right channel.
So the communication strategy to the community.
To the community, and especially as we start looking at different generations, down to Gen Zs, Alphas.
Yeah.
Who
are incredibly vocal when they don't like something.
100%.
So I've got a funny story just to tell on that very quickly. Actually, when you talk about age, the generational thing, having just done Jaeger, which is a fabulous 135-year-old brand that I know really well, I met so many 20-year-olds who thought it was Jägermeister. And
well, there's a collab.
That would have been a collab, actually. Absolutely. But it is interesting.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
Lewis, where are we going in the future?
Well, we better carry on with them because I've got bills to pay. But well, look, we haven't even talked about the metaverse, so we've got a whole new world to collaborate in, and that really lends itself to collaboration, I think. I think absolutely, as both Dan and Fiona have said, they have to carry on because they serve a really important and valuable purpose for so many businesses. You look at fledgling businesses who are struggling, with the Facebook algorithms. Well, if they can find a like-minded brand that has a different customer base, well, it makes so much sense. They can immediately tap into other people's communities. So I think it's really valuable, it's really valid, and you can see, again, as you've said, things are already progressing. We're seeing bigger and better collaborations. I don't know what's next, or if I did, I couldn't tell you. But I do think that I'm still excited by collaborations because, there's always clients coming to us with something new and exciting and different. And there are people, that push the boundaries. They don't always work, and then we're quick to attack them. But I admire the creativity and the desire to try different things. Yeah. And I think, will it result in mergers or new businesses? Who knows? But I very much hope that collaborations are not dead.
So we're talking about partnerships basically as a canvas for a new type of business. And I think what's happening is we're growing up through it as well. We're all maturing and knowing that actually it's got to deliver experience as well as community value. And I think that's been reinforced with everything that the panel have said today. Hopefully that's been an interesting discussion, but I'd love to fend some questions. I can tell you're all gagging to ask us a question tonight. We've got about 10 minutes and Steve has got the microphone. There you go, David.
So my interesting point is the art world. So Yaya Kusama, Louis Vuitton, which I think is amazing. What it does is this whole art world and those collaborations are educational as well. It means people might be interested in learning about the artist.
Absolutely.
And then it becomes experiential. So partnership is experience. You can go to Selfridges and it's now become an experience, and they've laid on these experiential treats with the artist. Lloyds Bank did something with an artist, and they did it as a pop-up, and they called it making a statement, because people were not educated in reading their statements. So they've used artists to say, and they decorated it all with different statements. I think, you know, when you look at the banks in this education, and again, using the right collaborations, we're getting to education. People might learn a lot more. So it's education, it's experience, and sometimes fun.
Yeah.
So that's the area. The Kusama thing's fantastic, and I'm a big fan of Kusama. So that for me is wonderful.
No, I think that's a really good point. And then back to Lewis's penultimate point is the application in the metaverse or in NFTs, where people can continue that education and experience and actually own a piece of it.
Yeah, but if they're doing in the stores, people will take kids there. And my brother-in-law's got young kids, and he takes them to all these things, and they're learning about it without realising what they're learning. Yeah. Until they get a bit older, and then they will realise.
It's an interesting angle, David. Yeah. Hello. Just over here. Oh, there we go.
Hello, thank you so much. So my background, I should
have asked you to introduce yourself. Sorry. Yes, and David Blakeney, thank you.
My name's Lucy Tamam. I'm a sustainable couture fashion designer. I have a small independent fashion label, but we've just launched at London Fashion Week a really exciting collaboration with the European Space Agency, which is massive, obviously.
They're a big boy and you're a little boy.
Yes, indeed. So my question is, what would you say is the most important thing to invest in when starting a collaboration like that? What should I really be making sure I've got? Which box should be ticked?
Who do you want to address that to?
Anyone, everyone.
Do you want to start with the legal side?
Yeah, I think a good contract.
Hire a lawyer.
Hire a lawyer to give you a list of the things that you need to think about.
But I think my issue is I'm small and I have very limited budgets.
Of course.
So what's the thing I should really invest in first?
So, I mean, I would ask, my first question is, what are you trying to achieve out of the collaboration? And if you've answered that question, which you obviously have, then it's about deconstructing that brand and really extracting all of the elements that you feel are relevant to your design process and to your brand, because you don't want to lose that. You want to continue and you want to protect your intellectual property, but then really borrow those elements from the European Space Agency to enhance for a season or whatever it might be. And it's really, going into wherever they're headquartered and spend some proper time with the astronauts or the technicians and really try and understand what that brand and the function is all about, and then translate it. I mean, I'm not a designer, but then translate it through the work that you're obviously doing very successfully.
Did they approach you out of interest?
Sort of.
It was a bit mutual because they must have a clear idea. Because to approach you, they've got an eye. One of the things that certainly I talk about when anybody engages in is go with your idea in mind. It's like Fiona talking about Jaguar. She could sell that down the line to them, but if you're going to approach a party, you've got to have a kind of a water cooler moment where you can describe what it's what the overall impact of the partnership is going to be.
I would also add what protection you have or exclusivity you have in partnering with that entity. If you look at NASA, every Tom, Dick and Harry is using the NASA logo without any regulations, restrictions or approval mechanisms, and that just dilutes the whole proposition. So I would make sure that there isn't another designer that's going to be doing the same thing, and that elevates your proposition.
On a basic level, I mean, you can just have a blank piece of paper and say, what do you want? What do they want? Who's going to deliver what? When's it got to be delivered by? Okay, can I deliver all of this? What do I have the funding in place? So it's actually very slowly going through all of the process. You don't need a lawyer to help you with that. Actually, it is the same way as when you set your business up. You start with a business plan. So it's a business plan. It really is. Hang on, why am I doing this? Okay, what? And then just breaking it up into the constituent parts. How am I going to market it? Can I market it? Can I deliver the value I need? Have I got the IP protection in place? When are they? What do I need from them? And actually, before you even embark on it, you need to know that actually it's a viable proposition for you. Because sometimes we see people approach us with really exciting deals, but it's just not viable for them at their the stage in their business for them to actually deliver it. And it can sometimes really be a distraction as well from actually their core business. Because if you are a small business and you embark on a partnership with someone like NASA, well, they've got teams of people. And so they could keep you very, very busy on something that might not be actually central and core to your business. So I think that writing it down and being quite specific and also making sure that you know what it is and you don't have mission creep and you have that kind of razor sharp focus so that actually it doesn't distract you from your day-to-day. Because actually I think at this stage of your business, that's the most important part when you've started an early business. You know, I see lots of clients get very excited by opportunities and it distracts them from their day-to-day, which is really central at this stage.
I would also ask them if they're going to wear it in space as well. When the astronauts are going to be donning some of your designs.
On the moon.
Thank you so much.
Sweetie. Oh, microphone just down here, please. Thank you.
This was fabulous, Angela. And
Good. Introduce yourself.
I will introduce myself, but I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really inspiring as an evening. So my name is Smrithi. I'm from a company called Supreme Creations and Bags of Ethics, and know a few people in the room. We are a sustainable manufacturer, but also a front-facing brand that is emerging. And I just want to touch on your point around supply chain and sustainability and traceability, because that's very much part of our own DNA. But is that written into any of your contracts? Is that emerging as an important issue when you are doing collaborations? Because the heart and spirit of collaboration seems quite emotional. It seems, you've all touched on it. Does it move me? And it's normally the founders or the creatives behind it. And the spirit of collaboration should be in good faith and goodwill, and collaboration can be really wonderful from that point of view. But sustainability is often missed.
So it depends. So if you've got mismatched businesses, so you've got small business, huge business, it's quite difficult for that small business to leverage the large business to disclose their supply chain and all of it. Is usually the larger business saying, here's our standard collaboration agreement. And if you're not careful, they sometimes even take all your IP without you realizing it. Mm-hmm. And your ability to negotiate their agreement is not truly a collaboration. It says it's a collaboration. They're going to market it as a collaboration. But actually, in practice, when you read the agreement, it's not a collaboration. It's a branding exercise by them sometimes. So, if you've got the ability, then certainly on one of the big deals I worked on recently with two evenly matched global businesses, they looked at each other's codes of ethics. They looked at each other's all of their policies. It was really important to them, because actually it's important to their businesses. They have to make statements, in public and to stock exchanges or whatever about what they're doing, and have to publish it in their returns. So yes, it does happen. I'm going to be honest. It's not every time that is front and center of people's minds. I think it's changing. Certainly, I think it's really, really changing in the last year to 18 months. Prior to that, less so. I don't think there was enough focus, but I definitely, particularly, brands are aware of this as an issue, and they're really careful, much more careful. They're not doing everything they can, but they're definitely getting a lot better.
I think with any collaboration you've got to look at what are the pros and what are the cons, and weigh up what are the non-negotiables, really. Because I guess any collaboration, if you're a small brand, you're hopefully going to get more eyes on the brand and more exposure, bigger volumes. But if the cons are you've got to compromise on something that's fundamental to your business, it isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think it is as black and white as that. I think if you don't align purpose and values, those are almost as fundamental now as sort of creative vision and all the other bits and pieces.
Cultural fit.
We are up to an hour, everybody. Steve is looking at us from the sidelines. We are invited to have more drink of this lovely, lovely champagne. Are there any more questions or?
I think this gentleman had a question halfway through. I don't know if it's still relevant.
No.
Maybe. I mean, I was thinking a lot was fashion to fashion or similar, where both are retailers, whilst we see a lot of collaborations where one is maybe a tech giant and the other company is something very different.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, not all of those are ideal either, but any thoughts on like when it's completely different industries combining?
Yeah, I mean, changing. I don't think there are any boundaries these days. We're going to see NASA wanting to go into fashion. Coca-Cola is a master collaborator, and they have made that a single purpose, haven't they, Dan? Because we know we used to work on it.
Yeah. I mean, another great example from a technology perspective.
It's the gaming industry.
There's gaming, and then I was thinking of
wanting to link to fashion. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Michelin tyres.
Oh, yeah.
Where there was a brilliant collaboration with the rubber technology of Michelin tyres that collabed and partnered with Babolat, the tennis shoe. So they were using the same technology and the same grip technology as you would find in tyres, but that was adapted to a tennis shoe, and that was one of the best the sole of the shoes.
Yeah.
So that was one of the best-selling tennis shoes in, I don't know what year it was, but
we did that a long time ago.
A long time ago.
It's almost erased from my mind.
So I don't think it's industry specific. I think from a consumer's perspective, everyone's probably touched on fashion because that's the most prevalent. But we've talked about food and beverage. There's technology plays. There's other industries that work. Wherever there's an equity play to borrow or to partner with, the principles still apply.
The only thing you see, obviously, if it's a fashion business to fashion business, they understand each other. If it's a fashion business going into a new technology, often they don't have the in-house expertise. I mean, we found this when we were advising clients on NFTs and the metaverse, and so it's suddenly all new and fresh to them. So they need much more assistance, not just from lawyers, but from consultants and other people. So it's quite easy for them to make a misstep in that it's a much more challenging collaboration because it's just not something that they intrinsically understand. So that coming together and understanding, I guess to kind of the NASA point with jeweler, what each party wants and how they're going to get that out of the relationship and whether they can deliver it. It's much more challenging to bring the parties together, and it takes a bit longer before you even start kind of getting the contracts out, I'd say. And you really need to invest in that part of the process because otherwise it would just not work.
Another great example very quickly is in the automotive sector where Aston Martin have used their design expertise, aerodynamics, and then the cockpit or cabin of the car to influence the design of speedboats, luxury apartments in Miami. There's a whole design team within the Aston Martin set up there that are specifically focused on bringing the Aston Martin experience as you would be sitting in a car into your living room or into a speedboat, and also a submarine if you have the money to buy one of those.
On that note, I think you're all invited to stay for a drink with us, yes? And I think the panel will be around as well if there are any other questions that anybody has on a one-to-one basis. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope that's been useful.